So what if we told you that genius isn't, some unattainable magic you're just born with?
Hmm.
What if the amazing things done by people like, say, Einstein or Mozart or even Walt Disney? What if it wasn't just random brilliance?
But maybe specific ways of thinking, identifiable patterns.
Exactly. Specific ways of thinking.
It's a really different way to look at it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Instead of just admiring the result, trying to figure out the process behind it.
Yeah, looking at these incredible minds not as like mystical figures, but as people who mastered certain, well, cognitive strategies.
Yeah, masters of strategy.
And that's precisely what this deep dive is all about. We've been digging into some really fascinating source material that tries to demystify genius.
To peel back the curtain a bit.
Right. Treating it not as this unknowable force, but maybe as a set of practical strategies, things you could potentially understand, maybe even learn.
Like getting a peek at the mental blueprints, not just seeing the amazing finished building, but how it was actually designed and put together.
Our mission today is really to pull out the core ideas from these sources, connect the dots, and hopefully make them relatable for you, like a shortcut to understanding how some truly remarkable minds worked. Okay, let's unpack this.
So the main idea in the sources is this: viewing genius fundamentally as a strategy, not just a trait.
Okay.
The goal isn't simply to be amazed by it, but to understand the cognitive patterns underneath,
Yeah.
to make it practical, less mysterious.
And the framework our sources use for this kind of cognitive mapping is Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP.
Right. Now, NLP, that term can sound a
A
bit...
bit technical, maybe intimidating.
Yeah, maybe. But really, at its core, it's about understanding the structure of how we experience things subjectively.
Okay, the structure.
That's the key thing. NLP tries to look beyond just what people do, their outward behavior, and explore the internal world. The thoughts, the beliefs, the mental steps behind the behavior.
It starts with this basic idea that we don't interact directly with reality itself, right?
Exactly. We operate based on our internal maps or models of the world, our own personal version of reality.
And the richness, the detail, the flexibility of that internal map, that's crucial.
Hugely crucial. From this perspective, geniuses have a rich representation or model of their situation, a really detailed, flexible map.
Which lets them see more possibilities.
Exactly. More options, more connections, more pathways than someone with a, let's say, simpler or more rigid mental model.
So these strategies we're talking about, they're kind of like the mental software we run.
That's a great analogy, like software running on our brains, hardware. Some software is just more efficient, Some processes information differently, spots patterns better.
And these strategies can be tiny, right? Like how you remember a phone number.
Micro strategies, yeah. Or they can be massive, like a whole approach to solving a complex problem. Or even how someone approaches their entire life's work. Macro strategies.
It's like zooming in and out on that mental map you mentioned. Street view versus the whole country view.
Precisely. Different levels of chunking, as the source material calls it. Breaking things down or seeing the bigger picture.
Speaking of breaking things down, the sources even bring Aristotle into this.
They do, which might seem like a jump, right? Ancient Greece meets modern cognitive science?
Yeah. What's the connection between Aristotle and, say, figuring out how Einstein thought?
Well, quite a lot, actually. Aristotle gave us some really fundamental ways to analyze anything. He had these 4 basic questions. First, the fact question, does a link exist?
Okay.
Second, the reason question, why does it exist? Third, existence, does the thing itself even exist? And fourth, nature, what exactly is this thing?
That sounds incredibly grounding, a way to cut through the noise.
It really is. And he also talked about finding first principles, the simplest core elements, by chunking down information, breaking complexity into fundamentals.
And he had different ideas about causes, too, why things happen.
Yes, and that connects directly to understanding strategies. He talked about different types of causes, like the antecedent cause, what kicked it off.
What triggered it.
Right. Or the constraining cause, what keeps things the way they are. The formal cause, the actual pattern or structure. And the final cause, the purpose, the goal.
Okay, so different angles on why.
Exactly. Looking at a strategy through these different cause lenses gives us powerful ways to figure out why it works or why someone thinks in a specific pattern.
But that brings up a huge question. How do you actually see these strategies or causes inside someone's head? You can't just, look inside.
Right, you can't. And that's where these NLP models become the tools. They offer frameworks to map these invisible cognitive processes by looking closely at observable things' behavior, language patterns.
Okay, so the models are like the mapping tools.
Let's look at a few simple ones. There's the SOAR model. Super basic. It looks at states your current situation.
Where you are now.
Operators, the actions you take.
What you do.
And the new state you reach.
Yeah.
Simple map. Here, action, there.
State, operator, result.
Okay.
Yeah.
But strategies are usually more complex than one step, aren't they? Like a sequence. Oh, absolutely. And that's where a model like TOTE comes in handy. It describes the feedback loops in bigger strategies.
TOTE?
Test, operate, test, exit. You start with a goal. That's the first test. You operate, you do something to change things. Then you test again, are you closer? And you exit when you hit the goal.
Okay, so test is like checking your progress. Operate is doing the work. Test again, exit when done.
Exactly. Think of navigating with a map. Test, where am I? Operate, drive, test, am I closer? Exit, arrived. For it to work well, you need clear goals, good sensory feedback, how do you know you're making progress, and flexibility in the operate part.
That makes a lot of sense, very intuitive. Now, what about the actual ingredients of thought, how we use our senses internally?
Now we get into the ROEL model. This looks at the microstructure.
ROLE. Okay, what's that stand for?
R is for representational systems, how we represent information internally using our senses.
Yeah.
Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, feeling, olfactory, gustatory, VA-COG for short.
VA-COG, how we see, hear, feel inside our heads.
Yep. And geniuses often use these and combine them in really interesting ways. O is for orientation, is the information external from the world, or internal, like remembered or imagined.
Okay, VA-COG, an inside or outside source. What's L?
L is for links. How are these different sensory bits connected? Does seeing something outside trigger an internal feeling? Does hearing a word create an image?
The connections between the senses. And E.
E is for effects. What's the purpose or outcome of using, say, vision versus sound in that specific step of the strategy? What function does it serve?
Wow, okay, that gets really granular, like looking at the wiring diagram. And you mentioned one more, SCORE.
Yeah, SCRE is great for problem solving or planning change. It stands for symptoms, what's the current issue? Causes, what led to it? Outcomes, what do you want instead? Resources, what do you have to help you get there? And effects, what are the wider consequences of achieving that outcome?
Symptoms, causes, outcomes, resources, effects.
And the source suggests organizing these, maybe even mapping them out on a middle timeline, can really help clarify the path forward.
So these models, SOAR, TOTE, ROEL, SCORE, they're different lenses for mapping how people think. Let's make this concrete. Let's look at some examples. First up, Sherlock Holmes, the ultimate detective mind.
Holmes is fascinating because while his skills seem almost magical, the stories constantly emphasize they're learned, acquired through intense study and observation.
Right, not magic, but method.
His big picture strategy, his meta strategy, is seeing life as this great chain. Understand one link, he believed, and you could deduce the whole chain.
He called himself a consulting detective, but others saw him as a necromancer.
Exactly. But he insisted it was long and patient study. His genius was rooted in hyper-observation and deduction from tiny clues everyone else misses. He talks about reading people, their jobs, their habits, even their thoughts from just looking at them.
How did he do that? What was the process?
It seems to be. Start with tiny, concrete facts, observable details. Make inferences based on those facts. Then, crucially, combine those inferences with his huge database of knowledge, social context, cultural norms, personal memories, and then, boom, draw these incredibly insightful conclusions. It's like building logic, link by careful link.
The source uses that amazing example with Watson's brother's watch. He just picks it up.
And instantly sees the detail. The case is scratched and dented. Inference, kept with hard objects like keys or coins. Conclusion, belonged to a careless man. Simple observation, logical step.
But then he opens it.
And sees detail. 4 sets of numbers scratched inside, pawnbroker's marks. Inference, it was pawned repeatedly. Conclusion, the brother was often short of money, often at low water. But then, a secondary inference, as Holmes puts it, he must have had occasional bursts of prosperity to keep redeeming it. See the layers.
Yeah, it's not just one leap. And the scratches around the keyhole? That's incredible.
Isn't it? Detail. Thousands of tiny scratches around where the key goes. Inference. The key must have slipped. A lot. Conclusion, the brother took to drink, and Holmes explains it, saying, quote, "What sober man's key could have scored those grooves? But you will never see a drunkard's watch without them." It's a perfect example. Tiny physical detail reveals a deep behavioral pattern.
He did the same thing reading Watson's thoughts, right? Just by watching him sit there.
Absolutely. He noticed Watson's posture, a subtle hand movement towards an old wound, a slight smile. From just those external physical cues, Holmes deduced Watson's entire train of thought about the futility of war, probably sparked by something Holmes had just said.
It really does feel like mind reading.
It feels like it, but from this NLP perspective, it's about reading subtle cues. There's actually a model derived from observing these kinds of things called the BAGEL model.
The BEL.
Okay, stands for body posture, accessing cues, like shifts in breathing, tiny sounds, gestures, eye movements where people look. Often tells you if they're visualizing, hearing sounds internally, feeling things, and language patterns.
So BAGEL.
By paying attention to those cues, like Holmes did instinctively, you can get insights into someone's internal state, their innermost thoughts, the structure of their thinking.
So Holmes's genius was this combination of sharp sensory input and structured logical steps, using these kinds of cues. Okay, let's shift gears completely. From deduction to, well, boundless creativity, Walt Disney.
Ah, Disney. Model is a genius of turning imagination into reality. His core strategy, according to the source, involves cycling through three very distinct mental roles or phases.
Okay, 3 roles.
The dreamer, the realist, and the critic. And the key was, these often conflict, right? But Disney managed to coordinate them.
Tell me about the dreamer.
The dreamer is pure imagination, creating new ideas, big visions, setting huge goals. It's about, quote, the ability to take something that exists only in the imagination and forge it into a physical existence. The attitude is, anything is possible, no limits. The source even describes his physiology when he was in dreamer mode. Lower one brow, squint his eyes, let his jaw drop, and stare fixedly. Just lost in an internal world.
Like he was seeing it all internally.
Totally. He even mentioned having synesthesia. He said, when I heard the music, it made pictures in my head. So very visual, very generative.
Okay, that's the big idea generator. What about the realist?
The realist is the bridge. This role takes the dream and figures out how to make it happen. It translates the vision into concrete steps, acting as if the dream is possible.
The practical planner.
Exactly. And the classic Disney technique of storyboarding. That's pure realist strategy. Breaking the big idea, the film or the park ride, into a sequence of images, like a visual table of contents. It chunks the dream down into actionable steps.
Makes sense. Dream it, then plan the build. What's the critic's job?
The critic is the quality filter. It steps back, evaluates, refines, looks for problems, potential flaws, ways to improve the plan or the idea.
The proofreader, the editor.
Kind of, yeah. But also taking the audience's perspective. Disney said, I have to get far enough away and take a second look so that I am looking at it as my audience would. It focuses on the final product, applies criteria, asks tough what-if questions. This role is often described as more analytical, maybe more auditory, rule-based.
So dreamer, what if? Realist, how to? Critic, is it good enough? What could go wrong? That's a powerful cycle. The source mentioned using different physical spaces for these roles.
Yeah, apparently he might have used different rooms or areas. The idea being that physically moving helps you shift mental states. Go to the dreamer couch, then the realist desk, then the critic chair. It helps keep the roles distinct and focused.
That's actually a really practical idea. You could try that yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Could intentionally shifting your state and location help you access these different thinking styles for your own projects? Interesting thought.
Very. Okay, let's jump to another realm entirely. Music. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. His work often feels like it just arrived. Perfect.
And his own descriptions feed that idea, don't they? He talked about music coming to him in a pleasing, lively dream. Effortless, flowing.
A pleasing, lively dream. Amazing. How did the source break down his process?
It suggests ideas often started from feelings, a kind of kinesthetic to auditory link. A feeling translates into sound. But the really mind-bending part, he didn't seem to hear it note by note, linearly.
No, how then?
He described hearing the whole piece, the entire symphony or concerto, all at once, internally, as a complete, perfect whole, a gestalt, the source calls it.
Yeah.
Already finished, already a good, nay, an excellent piece.
Hearing it all simultaneously, start to finish, every instrument perfectly balanced in one instant. That's hard to even grasp.
It really is. It implies this incredibly deep, simultaneous neurological activation. But the source emphasizes it wasn't just random inspiration. It was the result of a highly developed, probably unconscious mental strategy. Once that internal program was automated, it just ran.
So the creative work was building that internal gestalt and writing it down.
That was the easy part, apparently. He said, quote, the committing to paper is done quickly enough. It rarely differs on paper from what it was in my imagination.
Because it was already finished in his head.
Exactly. Writing was just transcription, taking that complete internal sound picture and putting the notes down, like reversing the chunking process from the whole gestalt back to the individual parts.
Wow. The source also mentioned ways we might try to make these internal processes more sort of tangible or teachable.
Yeah, ways to externalize them, like consciously linking sounds to visual patterns, maybe drawing music, or using technology computer programs that link seeing notes on screen to the feeling of playing the keys, bridging visual, auditory, and kinesthetic for learning sight reading, for instance. Trying to connect senses through what Aristotle called common sensibles, things like rhythm or shape that multiple senses can perceive.
Building bridges between the senses. Okay, so we've seen Aristotle's analysis, NLP models, Holmes's deduction, Disney's creative cycle, Mozart's internal composition. What are the common threads here? What do these geniuses seem to share in terms of how they thought?
Well, the source points out several recurring themes. One is having a vision or mission that felt bigger than themselves.
Like Holmes's Great Chain or Disney building worlds, Mozart feeling it was a gift.
Exactly. A purpose beyond the personal. Also, strong systems thinking, seeing connections, how things fit together. A deep focus on process, not just the final product or the specific idea. They seem fascinated by how things worked, including their own minds.
And they use their senses really vividly, right?
Absolutely. High sensory acuity, building really rich internal representations, VA-cog firing on all cylinders, often with that synesthesia we mentioned.
Like Disney seeing music, Mozart feeling sound.
Right. Also, incredible flexibility in chunking, moving smoothly between the big picture and the tiny details.
Zooming in and out effortlessly.
Using feedback loops, constantly testing ideas, getting feedback, adjusting, refining, maintaining a fundamental curiosity, always asking basic questions.
Why? How? What if?
Using metaphor and analogy a lot to grasp and explain things. And crucially, the ability to shift perceptual positions, seeing things from their own view, stepping into someone else's shoes, or taking a detached observer stance.
That's a powerful list. It really suggests that beneath the unique talents, there were shared ways of structuring thought.
And that leads back to the core idea from the sources. The goal of modeling isn't to say, this is the one true map of Mozart's brain.
Right.
It's to create instrumental maps, maps that are useful, that might be applicable.
Tools we can potentially learn from, maybe even use ourselves.
That's the suggestion, that these strategies can be modeled, understood, and perhaps even learned or installed using specific techniques. It implies the brilliance wasn't just what they thought, but fundamentally how they structured their thinking.
Which really leaves us with a fascinating thought, doesn't it? If genius involves these kinds of identifiable strategies, what does that mean for you listening?
Yeah, it suggests understanding how these minds worked isn't just, interesting trivia. It might offer real clues for enhancing your own thinking, your creativity, your problem solving.
It kind of invites you to turn that observational lens inward, doesn't it?
Totally. What clues do your own habits, your language, your focus reveal about your thinking strategies? Are you more visual, auditory? Do you jump to the big picture or get lost in details?
And that idea from Disney, what if you could consciously choose to step into those different roles? The expansive dreamer, the practical realist, the refining critic. What might open up for you then in your work, your life?
It's definitely something to ponder. Now, this deep dive has really just scratched the surface. The source material goes way deeper into these models, the case studies, and offers exercises and techniques.
So if you want to fully immerse yourself in these ideas, maybe even try out some of these strategies, we strongly encourage you to check out the complete book.
You'll find the link right there in the description of this deep dive.
Dive deeper, explore the models, and see how understanding the strategies of geniuses might just change how you think about your own potential.